In this segment, we'll look over Job 11 through 14. And here we have another friend of Job, Zophar, making his first statement in Job chapter 11. And then chapters 12, 13, and 14 comprise Job's response to Zophar. Two primary points are made by Zophar. Since he's holding on to conventional wisdom, we're not surprised to find that he would like Job to acknowledge guilt. For in Zophar's system, it's guilt that must be the source of the misfortune that Job is experiencing. Job, on his part, is going to resist that for the most part. And then the second point of Zophar is, Job, you need more wisdom. We're going to find Job responding, look, I've got plenty of wisdom. That's not a difficulty. The third one is a point that Job alone brings out. It's not issued by Zophar. And that is the matter of hope, the need for hope. So to begin with then, Zophar and his allegation that Job needs to acknowledge guilt. Notice verse 4 of chapter 11. For you say, my conduct is pure, I am clean in God's sight. And Zophar is saying, that's your claim, Job, but realize that that's not a tenable claim. Notice the end of verse 6. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. So clearly you're guilty, and frankly you're getting off easy. So it would be well if you would come around to confess. Let's take a look at verse 14 as well in this regard. If iniquity is in your hand, put it far from you, and do not let wickedness reside in your tents. And 15, surely then you will lift up your face without blemish. You will be secure and will not fear. So once again, in these verses 4 and 14 so far, he's urging Job to acknowledge guilt. The second point made by Zophar has to do with Job's need for wisdom as he understands it. Notice verse 6. Oh, that he would tell you the secrets of wisdom, for wisdom is many-sided. And then again in verse 12. A stupid person will get understanding when a wild ass is born a human. Why would Zophar bring this up unless he feels that someone is deficient in wisdom? And he evidently does not hold out a lot of hope, at least for someone classed as stupid, because he says it will take a long time for that person to come around to wisdom. It won't occur until we would have this miraculous experience of a wild ass being born, turning into a human. Now let's take a look at Job's response, comprising chapters 12, 13, and 14. First, on the issue of whether or not Job is deficient in the category of wisdom. Notice chapter 12, verse 2. No doubt you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. You've got a monopoly on wisdom, surely. This is a sarcastic tone. Verse 3. But I have understanding as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Who does not know such things? So he's just very pointedly opposing the opinion that Job is lacking in wisdom. He says, no, I'm in good shape in that category, and don't deny it. He makes the same point at the beginning of chapter 13. Here's Job 13, verse 2. What you know, I also know. I am not inferior to you. Now, what about the matter of Job's innocence or guilt? Job takes this up in chapter 12, beginning with verse 7. But ask the animals, and they will teach you, the birds of the air, they will tell you. Incidentally, Zophar has been earlier indicating that the extent of God's wisdom is indicated by the expanse of his creation. And so Job appeals to the expanse of his creation and says, look, if you go to them, they will teach you something that you don't know. You're a little deficient in wisdom, Zophar. Verse 8, ask the plants of the earth, they will teach you. The fish of the sea will declare to you. And now, verse 9, who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? Now, on the one hand, it's possible to interpret this statement, the hand of the Lord has done this, as referring to the animals, the birds, and the plants, the fish, namely that God has done them, that is, created them. However, I think it's more likely, particularly given the Hebrew expression, the hand of the Lord has done this, that rather he's referring to some specific act relative to his own human experience, not God's creation at the origin of time. That God is responsible for what Job has experienced. So in effect, Job is appealing to the created order and saying, if you were to ask them, they would look at my plight and they would affirm that I have not brought this about through my wrongdoing, but God, the hand of the Lord, has brought this about. This understanding, I believe, is further brought out as we scan the ensuing verses, particularly beginning with verse 13. With God are wisdom and strength, and then notice the prerogatives that God exercises. 14, if he tears down, no one can rebuild. So God has the supreme say-so. He can do what he wishes. 17, he leads counselors away stripped. He makes fools of judges. So he has supreme authority over people who claim to be wise. So it appears here that Job is affirming God has the ability to upset order. He has the ability to render weak those that we think are strong, leaders in society. He can reduce them just with a word or with a mere insignificant action. God can overturn that. And by extrapolation, Job is saying, this is what has happened to me. There is an especially poignant question that Job raises in chapter 13. Chapter 13, verse 7. Verse 7. Will you, he's speaking now to his friends, most recently to Zophar, will you speak falsely for God and speak deceitfully for him? Will you speak falsely for God and speak deceitfully for him? When we come to the end of the book and God finally engages Job directly, one of the statements that we'll find God making is an assessment of how Job's friends conducted themselves. Let's take a look at that right now. In fact, here is Job 42. We're interested in particular in verse 7, 42:7. After the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, so this is one of the three initial friends, my wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends, for, notice this expression, you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Notice the similarity between this censure, this condemnation from God. You have not spoken of me what is right. Here again in chapter 13, verse 7, the question raised by Job, will you speak falsely for God and speak deceitfully for him? Here's something that we might want to consider personally in shepherding or encouraging friends. When we see someone encountering difficulty, we should be very cautious to supposedly go too quickly to God's support. That is, to make God look good in a time of difficulty. This is what the three friends were endeavoring to do. And in so doing, because they didn't have a fuller picture, they wound up speaking falsely on God's behalf. This is something that we should be careful about. Now, we've been saying that Job protests his innocence and says instead that God has brought this about. Nevertheless, notice here in chapter 13, when we come to verse 23, we find Job being open to God revealing his sin. It's not as though he's assumed an attitude that says, well, I surely must not have sinned. I'm just completely sure of that. He displays a pliability, a vulnerability of heart before the Almighty God. So he asks in verse 23 of chapter 13, how many are my iniquities and my sins? Incidentally, as you may be aware, sometimes when we encounter this interrogative, how many, it's actually a means of announcing that something is in great quantity. It's rhetorical, as if to say, how many are the stars of the sky? It's not a question asking for an inventory. It's saying there are a lot of them. Now, in this situation, however, the expression does not move in that direction, but it rather is asking, please genuinely tell me how many there are. So we see in the second part of verse 23 a genuine request. Make me know that my transgression and sin. I can't see it, but if it's actually there, I'm open to you revealing that. So this is a beautiful humility on Job's part. The last element we'll want to observe in this series of chapters has to do with hope, or more accurately, the loss of hope. In chapter 14, verse 7, we find Job pointing out that if a tree is cut down, there's hope that it may spring back again. In contrast, chapter 14, verse 10, but mortals die and are laid low. Humans expire, and where are they? In verse 13, he asks that he would be hid in Sheol, somehow to be covered over until what seems to be a wrathful response of God would die out. In 15, he welcomes an opportunity to meet with God, perhaps after this seeming period of wrath would pass over. He hopes in 17 that his transgression would be sealed up and his iniquity covered over. The issue of hope returns in verse 19. We'll begin with verse 18. But the mountain falls and crumbles away, and the rock is removed from its place. The waters wear away the stones. The torrents wash away the soil of the earth. So you destroy the hope of mortals. Even something so invincible as a rock, a mountain, slowly eroded away, waters wearing grooves in the soil and in stone. He says, that's what it's like in my relationship with you. It seems like you're wearing away our hope. This draws to a close Job's response to Zophar, and next in chapter 15 we'll find Eliphaz taking up the conversation.